All right, let's go ahead and get started with part 2 of the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series. I thought I would just pause for a moment and sort of reflect on the last few years when the war between Ukraine and Russia broke out, and then we hit a year anniversary. I thought, how could it be that there's a year of war? And today we face a year of war in the Middle East with great loss of life and tremendous fear on so many families and friends and people. And I don't know, not that we have a whole lot of control over such big global things, but I know that many people are hurting and worried and thinking about it. And I think one of the things about resilience is acknowledging what feels heavy, and it certainly feels heavy right now. And I know we're entering a heavy fall with a really highly polarized, intense election coming up. And I've been reflecting a lot about that today. And so for all of you with people that you love and care about in all kinds of unsafe places, we wish you and your families the best. Likewise, climate disasters are no less challenging and traumatic, and we saw Florida grapple with one hurricane and Western North Carolina to be shockingly devastated by the aftermath, and now we watch Hurricane Milton and it looks just as damaging and devastating. So for those of you with family there, I spent many years of my life in North Carolina and really care deeply about the beautiful areas that have been damaged there. And so everyone should take care of themselves. There's just an awful lot happening. We're going to talk today about cognitive distortions and imposter fears. But first, let me tend to the business of Unit 1. I had said I would keep track of the wellness collages or well-being collages and make a donation. I got a lot of them. I want to thank you. So many of you wrote emails along with yours, explained elements of it. I met more pets and spouses and partners and children. I learned a lot about what you all love. I don't think we reached 100, but my plan is to make a donation nonetheless. Reflecting so much on the need for peace in the world, I plan to find an organization that supports people traumatized by the violence of war. And I'm going to split that with relief efforts for Florida and North Carolina. If you feel strongly about another organization, drop me an email. And I should thank all of you who answered the call and those of you who didn't but made a wellness collage anyway. It always makes me reflect on my own well-being, and talking about it made me appreciate that I hadn't seen any art in a while, and I certainly hadn't spent enough time in nature. And I really doubled down on both of those this weekend, and I really needed it. So I should thank all of you for prompting the discussion. I'd like to start and just ask you to reflect back on the last 2 weeks, and we can use Slido to simply put in with one word or a short sentence what changes you focused on in these last 2 weeks. Did you suddenly make a change in your exercise routine, contemplate a change? Did you show up for the group and share just something that might have changed for you in the last 2 weeks since we talked about it? A lot of really important elements there, with sleep being right now the largest, but meditation and exercise awfully close. Accepted help, that makes me really happy to see. Reflection and family, talking, time with friends, evaluating self-talk, less perfectionism, a whole lot of exercise. Interestingly, I'm doing a challenge with my workout group right now, and the only reason that I went to class this morning was so that I could check off the box in the accountability challenge. Not that I think I'm going to win a prize, but it is funny how just a little something can make you pay more attention. So sleep and journaling probably slightly more than some of the others, but a lot of different things. I mean, just look at all the different things that people worked on. And my hope is that we remember this and it's not a one-time thing. So we'll keep coming back to reminding ourselves of what we are doing different, what we are thinking about differently. I want to start the discussion on cognitive distortions and imposter fears by reminding you of this triangle, which is going to be a model for our 5 units together. And that is that our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors are inextricably linked. And when we make changes in one, we can influence the others. And so many of what we just saw on the last slide reflected that, right? I exercise, I manage stress better, I manage relationships better, things go better, it's a better week overall. I acknowledge my emotions, right? And I sit with them for a while, and it allows me to find a way forward with more helpful behaviors, changing my thoughts, etc. So we're going to focus today a lot on thoughts. And we are going to start from the basic premise that we are all storytellers. And I think if you reflect back on your childhood, you will appreciate the many stories that you heard. Family stories and stories of grace and survival in your community, your communities of origin, stories that we've heard in school and out of school, all over. We are natural born storytellers. We tell ourselves stories about ourselves and our place in the world, and we tell stories about what is happening to us and why it is happening. So we are told stories and we tell ourselves stories about ourselves. The stories that we tell about ourselves are impacted by stories others have told us or are telling us. If we tell a story of not belonging and somebody conveys a message of not belonging by not inviting us to something, that amplifies the story. Sometimes we hear stories from people that are really important to us. Sometimes the honest truth is people who don't matter to us at all, who we've never met, might be telling a story about us, and somehow it seeps in. Even if we wish to say, I'm not going to engage with that, the honest truth is the stories that we tell ourselves are influenced by the stories others tell. And the reason why it is so important to be aware of those stories is that they can drive and confirm and or amplify the stories that we tell. And if they are telling negative stories, it can amplify our negative stories. So if we are telling a story of struggle at work, of not being good enough, of not likely succeeding in something important to us, right? And we are hearing stories related to that, it can really amplify the negativity of our own story. Sometimes these are inadvertent. Someone doesn't even realize they're sending us a message that plays into a hard story that we have. Sometimes it actually might be intentional. Someone is frustrated on us and they say something they shouldn't say, and it adds to our story. These can be driven by bias, both conscious and unconscious, and these can be driven by stress. And the more challenging the work environment you are in, the more challenging the educational environment you are in, the more likely it is that these stories will come from a negative perspective. The thing is that the opposite is also true. Stories can drive, confirm, and amplify positive stories that we tell about ourselves. I work hard. I'm a serious learner. I can figure this out. A much more positive spin on what's going on for us. Supportive colleagues, peers around us, mentors, both in the research space and outside, can make a big difference. Joining various social and community groups, affinity groups here at NIH, being a part of the Resilient Scientist Series discussions, all of these are ways to find energy around more positive stories. We are going to tell a mix of helpful and unhelpful, positive and less positive stories about ourselves. That is human nature. We are constantly telling stories. The question is, can we drive ourselves towards more helpful stories? Can we silence even just a little bit the ones that are making us do unhelpful behaviors, hide, not seek help, etc.? And so we really have to start by considering the stories we tell about ourselves. One year, I did this slightly differently towards the beginning, and I said, so what are some of the stories you tell about yourself? And I read all the responses, and I sort of went, oh, so many stories that are really looking at flaws or weaknesses or places that we need to grow. And I realized that that's a fair question, and we're going to come to that. But I want to start instead learning from that moment by some of the helpful stories you generally tell yourself about you. When the going gets tough, what do you say to yourself about your prior accomplishments? What are the helpful, positive, growth mindset stories that you tell? All right. And if your first thought is a negative story, just put it aside for a moment and try to dig and find another one. So what are some of the helpful stories? I always get back up, and that is a really common one. I'm capable of accomplishing hard things. I'm a survivor. I don't fail. I learn. I've always gotten through it before, and they're starting to come too fast for me to keep track of all of them. These are really nice examples of how we add to our resilience toolkit by tapping into things we have accomplished in the past. I'm strong, just take it one at a time. I will be okay. Mistakes make me learn, I adapt, and they just keep coming. Okay? Sometimes we pull on those stories in hard times, and sometimes we simply forget them in hard times. Just when we need them, they are gone. And so really reflecting on these stories and coming up with phrases and mantras can really help us grab onto them. So I'm going to let this go on for just a few more seconds. A few more people are typing. It's interesting. I see one here. I made wonderful and fearfully in God's image. Someone tapping in to their spiritual and religious beliefs in the stories that they tell. I just love I am making history, right? We all have a history to make, and it's different in so many ways. But in a community where representation is still lacking, those thoughts of making history can be a very powerful driver. I've always dug deep. I am stubborn. I'm going to say yes to stubborn with a caveat, and actually to all of these, that strengths overused become liabilities. So stubbornness can be a beautiful strength. I always get up can be a beautiful strength. I persevere, beautiful strength. And at times, we want to soften those. Right? I'm stubborn, but right now I'm going to be less stubborn. I always get right up, but this time I'm going to get some help before I do. So these are some really nice examples of positive stories. Now I want to acknowledge that we also tell some pretty hard stories. Those of you here last week will resonate when I say pretty jackal stories about ourselves. We tear ourselves down. And I'm not going to collect those stories. I have to say they're really painful to read. And in some ways they make a point, but in other ways, I'm not so sure we need a catalog of all of those internal jackal stories, but just reflect a moment on the exercise and the positive stories and think about what some of the less helpful stories are and how you get caught up in those. We talked about using journaling to reflect on when you were resilient in the past and when you weren't so resilient in the past. And I'm guessing these stories come into play on both sides. When we get caught in those unhelpful stories is when we're often not very resilient. We see our flaw, we amplify our flaw a couple of log units. We let our flaw, which we all have, fill the entire room, the entire space, our head, right? And we can't get out of it. So just think about replacing those unhelpful jackal stories with more realistic, helpful giraffe stories. And we're going to talk today a lot about that, with the goal being not so much ostrich. I ignore the issues and just assume it will get better. Remembering that jackal stories can be really unkind and disrespectful. They're a lot about blaming ourselves and others. It's sort of a fixed mindset. I can't change this. And that our goal is a more giraffe-oriented story, helpful and realistic, noticing realistic. So it's not a toxic positivity, everything will be fine. I can just assume everything will be fine. Wouldn't that be nice? But it's not usually, right? We have to take action. We have to make measured decisions. We have to reach out for the support we need. So more giraffe-oriented stories. And in some ways, when I get caught in a story, whether it's about me or about someone important to me, I can sometimes simply by saying jackal, giraffe, ostrich to myself internally, occasionally out loud, but I like to do that when not too many people are watching. Just that alone can stop a really toxic story, okay? Or a really ostrich story that's not going to help in the long term. All right? So just remember the shortcut: jackal, giraffe, ostrich. We're going to work with this material by talking about a model of intervening with the stories we tell. Now, first of all, we have to be aware of them. Second of all, we have to catalog them. Okay, we can't have an infinite, in our mind, set of stories that we tell. So we want to try to bundle them or characterize them or catalog them. And so that's what we're going to do for a little bit today. And this starts with Albert Ellis's model of the ABCs. Actually adds D and E later, but we're going to start with A, B, and C. So A is the activating event. Things happen. Okay, that could be an adversity, that could be you open a rejection letter, that could be, you missed a deadline, that could be a bad score on an exam, that could be a disagreement in your research group, a really disappointing result, anything, an activating event. It could be in your personal life, but impacting work, it could be in work. Now, you could skip the B and say a lot of those come with consequences. If my paper didn't get accepted, I am going to have to pick another journal, fix things, resubmit, wait again, go through all the pain a second time. If I get a lousy score on a really important exam, I'm going to have to face the grade that comes along with that and what influence it might or might not happen. Okay, so you could just say activating events lead to consequences. Now, sometimes they're small, sometimes they're big. You could skip in between. But the honest truth is we tell a story about that event. And those beliefs that underlie the story is the only part here where we have control. Once the event is over, we cannot replay the tape and do it over. So we can't restudy, resubmit, change the paper. take a different approach with our PI or whoever we had a disagreement with. The activating event is done. So we can't wind it backwards. All we can do is look at the story we tell about it or the beliefs about it and make sure they don't make the consequences worse. And if possible, minimize the consequences. Okay, so improve the outcome. So our locus of control is at the belief level. Just like in that Wordle at the beginning, our locus of control was choosing to try meditation, choosing to try to get more sleep, choosing a chance to exercise. So our locus of control is paying attention to the beliefs that underlie a story. And there is, in fact, a catalog of those. You could just, each of us, look individually at the kinds of stories we tell and try to find patterns, but that would take a lot of time. And as smart scientists who learn from the literature, we can look at the literature on cognitive distortions, and we can get a sense of the types of beliefs that typically drive stories. Okay, the literature uses two things: cognitive distortions, and then another set of individuals use automatic negative thoughts, focusing on the fact that many times our beliefs tend to be more negative. So you could Google cognitive distortions or automatic negative thoughts, and you will find a rich literature. But I'm going to teach you a little bit about that literature today. So the thing about a cognitive distortion is it's habitual. It's the way we generally tell a story. All right. And in fact, it's a habitual way that our mind convinces us of something that is not fully supported or supported at all by fact. Okay. This is a disaster. I will never overcome this. What data in the moment actually supports that? I totally don't belong here. I'm just an imposter. I should leave today. What are the data in whole or part that support that? For the most part, because our brain has a strong primitive threat detection system, most of us tend to tell habitually negative stories. Okay, and that's where the language automatic negative thoughts comes from. All right, so our amygdala evolved to keep us safe long ago, right? And we see everything through a somewhat negative lens. All right, the fight or flight response, right? We can't say, oh, tiny risk, major risk. It's just the same physiology, all right? And it's how we decode it as small or big, where we start to have some control. Now, I do agree that many people tell stories through an unrealistically negative lens or a sort of jackal lens. But I do think that there's a group of people who have learned amazing ostrich skills, right? And they really tend to tell stories through an unrealistically positive lens. And when we do that, we don't take care of issues. If we say, oh, it'll be fine, tomorrow will be better, oh, tomorrow wasn't better, the next day will be better, Wednesday will be better, Thursday, next week, next month, right? If we never sit and say, ooh, some things aren't going well, right? We have the same problem of amplifying the consequences. We've just amplified them in a different way. Each of you probably has a sense of whether you tell unrealistically negative stories or unrealistically positive stories. And some of you might also notice sometimes when you do a great job of channeling your inner giraffe and tell a pretty realistic story. To help you really understand the stories you tell, I want to give you some of the most common cognitive distortions that we hear in our community and in general. And the first is all or nothing thinking. So our performance is either perfect or a complete failure. You go to a meeting, you present a poster, you do quite well, but one person or maybe two people asked you a few questions where you just said, I don't know. Or you had to look towards your PI or your collaborator standing there, and you get back and someone says, how did your poster go? And you say, terrible. Or you go to a committee meeting, right, or a meeting of collaborators, and people bring up a lot of issues, but there is also acknowledgement of something going well. And you leave and you say, well, that was great. And you ignore the issues. So all or nothing thinking, all good or all bad. Now, when you look in the dictionary next to catastrophizing, you would see me as a picture in the example. This would be my go-to cognitive distortion. This is when we exaggerate the implications of a setback or mistake. I will never get a job after this. I won't get a letter of recommendation from my PI because of what happened this week. I don't belong here. I should leave now. It's all on me. I'm just not cut out for this. We catastrophize an outcome, okay? Mind reading and fortune telling tend to go together, but you should think of them separately at the outset. So mind reading is when we make assumptions about what someone else is thinking. You emailed an abstract or a draft of the methods, whatever, to your PI or a collaborator on Friday, and you get to work on Monday. You're a bit stressed about it, maybe even dreamed about it a little bit, nervous about the feedback you're going to get. And your PI comes in, sees you, and walks right past you, barely saying anything to you. And you say, oh, hated my abstract. Could be late for a meeting, could be never saw your email yet, could be had a really bad morning at home, the dog threw up on the rug, right? Could be all kinds of things we mind read. Going along with that is fortune telling. We predict the outcome of an event before it ever happens. So if someone forwards a travel award to you and the first thing you say is, oh, I'll never get that, that is an example of fortune telling. All right. We predict the outcome before it happens. Now, some of you might have heard all four of these and said, me, I use all of these, or one might have really resonated. You might use some of them, but one is really your signature go-to cognitive distortion. Keep paying attention to that. Emotional reasoning is when we assume our emotions are a true reflection of the way things are. So I'll use a word that I don't like to use and try not to use. Stupid. I feel so stupid. You make a mistake, right? You move everything over a decimal point. Things are really a disaster that day. I am so stupid. I feel stupid. I am stupid. I feel like an imposter. I feel like I don't belong, so I really don't belong. It's when we take the emotion that is a fleeting emotion, a response to something that happened to us, and we hold on to it as a reflection of fact. So that's called emotional reasoning. Overgeneralization. We reach a conclusion about one event and we apply it to all similar events. I didn't pass my qualifying exam in grad school the first time through, and every competition, every exam, everything that happened past then, it's like I just carried this umbrella through with me. I didn't pass that exam, I won't pass this one. I didn't pass my exam, I won't get this travel award. I didn't pass my exam, I'm not gonna get that grant. I won't be found worthy there either. So we generalize. And then personalization. We think the problem is something that's really under our control fully, and we don't consider other outside factors or causes that contributed to it. So I'll give you a very simple example and then a more complex one that I often hear around workplace relationships. A simple one is I often take the bus to work. And I do pretty well leaving on time. I know the schedule. I know how fast I can get to the J bus. I know when the bus is coming, so I run the other way to get to the other stop. I do pretty well, but every once in a while I am late for something because of the bus. And I will get into my catastrophizing story, and as if I controlled the bus schedule, or I control that there was a red light, or I control that there was somebody blocking the intersection, right? Instead of saying, well, taking the bus has its pluses and its minuses, and today it didn't work out so well for me, so let me just send an email, apologize, and tell people I'm going to be late. I tell this huge catastrophe story about people starting the meeting without me, being irritated that I was late, making decisions without me. They will be decisions I can't fix, all the way towards the end catastrophe. And that's somewhat of a simple, but I think clear example. But a lot of times when it comes to being new in a lab, making early learner mistakes, or even mistakes after we've been in a group for a long time, right? It's like it's all on us. Maybe someone made a mistake in the protocol. Maybe someone was a little busy and didn't help, right? Maybe there was so much going on and we got disturbed in the middle. We never see anything but blame. Now, that could be blame of ourselves. Sometimes personalization is really all deflected to someone else. Instead of seeing our part, we just see it all on the other party. So this one, I think, comes into play a lot as we think about being a learner in a group, being on a team in a group, where when it comes to what are the outside circumstances that got us here, we can really have a blind spot. And then the last one we'll talk about before we look at and sort of own ours and talk about these in more detail is one called discounting the positive or minimizing. And this underlies imposter fears. So we're going to talk about them a lot later. This is when we discount positive outcomes, discount positive things about us by insisting they don't count or they were just luck. Oh, I got into the post-bac program because they couldn't find anybody else. Oh, I must have been one of only 3 people who applied for this travel award. Someone says congratulations and we minimize our accomplishment right away. Oh, it was nothing. Discounting the positive is our tendency to do that. So what I want everybody to do is spend a moment thinking about your common, most often cognitive distortions. And the reason for this is the first step is knowing what we do. So now that I'm so aware through all these lectures of how often I catastrophize, I watch for it and I stop myself. And not a big surprise, in many, maybe all of these lectures, discounting the positive has been at the top. It's one that really, I think that people in educational spaces struggle with and other creative spaces. And we're going to talk a lot about that. So mind reading and fortune telling are pretty high up there. Catastrophizing starting to be a lot less common. But if you notice, all of these are somewhat common. Some people look at this and say, check all of them. Some people say, this is my biggest issue. This is my second issue. The first thing is to notice that. And the second thing is to think about the issues that come out of that. So at first I looked and said, yeah, I catastrophize a lot. So what? But then I realized that as I'm interacting with other people, it's not helping. They don't always want to hear the worst possible outcome, right? They would like a more measured discussion of what happened. Or I start catastrophizing. One set of distorted stories can lead to more distorted stories. So they grow and grow and grow. We all exaggerate as we tell stories again and again. So beyond cataloging, think about how they influence your relationships, how they influence your responses to different adversities. All right, so now that we've cataloged them, let's talk about them a little bit more. Number 1, these are common and normal, and there is nothing wrong with us. They are simply a part of the wiring of our nervous systems. We hear stories from day one, right? And it's probably nature and nurture, partially how we are hardwired in our nervous system and largely the stories we heard as we grew up. And I think about catastrophizing and I realize it runs in the family, right? So I know exactly where I learned it. I think science itself pushes us towards a bit of catastrophizing too, and a lot of all or nothing thinking. Nobody says, well, that was a great review, but the paper didn't get in. We just say, damn it, the paper didn't get in, right? So I think we drive some of these stories from science. Some are driven from our nervous system, and some are driven by the families that we've been a part of. Now, when we engage with others, we need to remember that we are telling a distorted story and they are telling a distorted story, sometimes at the same time, sometimes completely different stories, right? So they have their own go-to distortions, right? Maybe they share them, right? If I'm really good at communicating, I acknowledge sometimes, I tend to see things from a really negative lens. So forgive a little bit of catastrophizing as we talk that through. So maybe I'm very open about it. Maybe I hide it, right? And you have no idea what distortion is driving the story on the other side. So it is really important to keep in mind that you have a story you're telling and everybody else involved in the situation has a story they're telling. Now, we're going to talk about the consequences and how to deal with those, but first we're going to take a segue and talk about imposter fears and notice the language. I think imposter fears are a much more accurate framing of the issue. Fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, harm, or be a threat. When we sit in a room, in a classroom or a lab meeting with lots of very accomplished people, some of whom have been in that room far longer than us or have a little bit more experience beforehand or less experience, we don't know, but we sit in a room full of people who are accomplished. It is not unreasonable to worry for a moment about how prepared we are. When lab meeting starts and we're brand new and we are lost in sentence 3, completely appropriate because the person giving the talk has been doing this for 10 years and we've been doing this for 10 days, right? It is reasonable to feel some fear. Is my question smart or not? Should I understand more or not? Will I embarrass myself by asking this or not? And so I think that imposter fear is a more appropriate language than imposter syndrome. Fear comes and goes. Fear can be managed by asking ourselves, how big of a threat is this, right? How accurate am I in feeling so much like an imposter right now? I think it gives us more tools to work with it. So I personally really prefer the language of imposter fear. And I like to ask myself, real or imagined, right? Is the fear right now real or imagined? I just had an interesting experience walking over here earlier today. I sent an email that I was quite worried about to a leader at NIH. I spent a long time drafting and redrafting and rereading and fixing and changing that email. And I'm a bit nervous about the reception. And one of the people in the 2 line was walking towards me as I was walking here. Okay. And I just suddenly felt my whole sort of mindset shift. I realized I was feeling some bit of stress. They turned off before we crossed each other. And my first thing, mind reading, oh, they're avoiding me, as opposed to that is the safe place to cross. And they're going that way, not this way, right? Fear, right? Fear can be assessed. Okay, so is how I'm feeling right now real or imagined? Is it necessary? Is it helpful? Do I need to let it go or act on it? And I think there might have been a time where that triggering of fear, I would have turned and ran after and tried to figure things out. And I was able to say, first of all, the whole thing is sort of imagined. I wrote an email about work to somebody at work. And I've invested a lot of energy into it because of the hierarchy and power dynamic. You all live in a hierarchy and power dynamic. We all do, right? But trainees much more than employees. So for me, fear is a much better phrase when we talk about imposter fears and this question of real or imagined. So let's define them exactly. This is the fear of being seen as not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough, not creative enough, despite prior evidence to the contrary. Not to say all prior evidence that we have tells us that we are a star in everything, right? We know we're not. We know we have a lot to learn. We know we are surrounded by people with a whole lot of smarts, and we have our smarts too. Imposter fears stem from the cognitive distortion of minimizing, because we tend to say, oh, it was just luck. Oh, I didn't really accomplish that. Oh, it doesn't really mean anything. We tend to minimize our accomplishments to the point that we sort of feel we don't have a right to take up the space, to be here, to contribute, and actually even the right to make mistakes. All right. And remember, we talked about the fact that distorted stories come bubbling up, but they also get dumped on us. And how many of us have had a teacher say, oh, you should have known that? Or a lab person, a mentor in the lab say, other postbacks know how to do that. Other postdocs can handle that. My last grad student didn't have a problem with that. So we feel imposter fears because naturally we're comparing ourselves and worried about growing and learning, and because the environment is making us consciously always aware of what we don't know and not so often what we do know. Imposter fears make us feel like we don't belong. And the honest truth is nobody can learn, take risks, or grow unless they feel that they belong. Belonging comes together with psychological safety, and we need that to make mistakes. We need that really not so much to make them as to learn from them. And so many of you told some nice stories about learning from mistakes in that first exercise. But we work in an environment that sends a completely different message, and it drives imposter fears. The causes of imposter fears in the literature can be grouped into 5 types. There's a lot of growing literature on imposter fears being driven from external factors, which is really nice to see. But I'll talk first about internal factors. So first of all, being a student means facing what we don't know. By definition, you came here to learn. By definition, if we signed up for a class, we are there to learn. It is rare to sign up for something that we already know, right? Or to join a lab and say, I'm only going to do things I'm really good at already. So being a student drives imposter fears. Being in an environment that feels foreign or different to you. So every new person is going to be poked a little bit more by imposter fears. It's why they come and go. You might feel great as a grad student, and then you move across the world, the country, even just locally move from one building to another, but suddenly you're in a new environment and it doesn't feel the same. And that drives imposter fears. Messages that we get from family and childhood make a big difference, right? If you are told, well, your brother's the smart one, but you're the helpful one. It's nice to be told you're helpful, but it's also essentially being told, but you're not the smart one. And parents say things like that, sometimes not even realizing that we remember it for decades and decades later. So it can be from family and childhood. It can also be organizational culture, right? There's a coffee mug, NIH, full of really smart people. Yeah, think about having to read that just as you realize you made a pretty big calculation error and have to redo your experiment. Using, the word scholar in so many of our programs, right? It conveys someone who gets it right all the time. Got it right to get here, gets it right now, shines all the time. And so we carry those messages. And there are many questions from broader societal culture about what women are good at, what people of color are good at, what international scholars bring or don't bring to the table. There are so many cultural messages that we receive. Who are the assertive ones? Who are the ones who are good in math? Who are the ones who are entrepreneurial? Who are the ones who are too emotional, not emotional enough, etc.? We get huge number of messages that drive imposter fears. For people of color and people with identities that are underrepresented in the research space, the phenomenon of stereotype threat drives imposter fears. So if you have received messages about your community and whether they belong or don't belong in science in a particular discipline, that worry that a mistake confirms the stereotype drives imposter fears. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to appreciate that, yes, imposter fears can bubble up internally, but that a lot of imposter fears are dumped on us, okay? And if you bring to the workplace unique, beautiful elements of who you are, and you feel very proud of them, then the desire to protect those identities and those communities is very high. And therefore, imposter fears can really bubble up. In fact, the research on imposter fears started with women in academic environments. And then the research showed, oh, this is not just based on gender, people of color, people who are differentially abled, people who are queer and feel that their identities are missing in the space. Okay, it can be around many of our identities. And we'll talk in Unit 4, I think, about something called attributional ambiguity, which ties identity to how we receive feedback, and identity is tied to how we experience imposter fears. Imposter fears can be driven by external factors: microaggressions, bullying, harassment, discrimination, absent or poor mentoring relationships can make us feel more imposter fears. One benefit of discussing the external factors is the more we're aware of them, the more we can sort of be cautious about taking on other people's views of us. But I think another thing is that we can be much more aware as we pick work environments to find ones that are positive, supportive, welcoming, inclusive, right? To learn, we have to feel safe. To feel safe, we have to have many people helping us when imposter fears bubble up. So look at this list, right? I mean, some of it we don't have control of. We got the messages we got, right? And we carry them. So our control is how we respond to them. Now, I want to spend a moment and just have everyone reflect on how often they experience imposter fears. And then I'm going to go back and share the data with you from other groups. So go ahead. So slightly over half of the people who've taken the poll have said most days. There's a small number of people who said almost never. No one who said never. I want to make a couple of comments on this. One time we did the whole series with a large number of administrators and faculty at the same time. So we had a huge audience of students and a huge audience of administrators and faculty, and we had them rank this separately. So the students did it, and then we closed the poll, and then the administrators and faculty did it. Something that was interesting to me, there definitely was a softening or a decrease, but there were still an awful lot of people who said, these are still an issue for me. I still struggle with imposter fears. Okay. The second point I wanted to make about that was that a few people reflected on they experienced a lot of imposter fears earlier in their career and that they've really just diminished. So now they say almost never, a few days here and there, but that would not have been what they said 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So the important elements of that story are two. First of all, this is a lifelong issue. When we work in intense high knowledge environments, it's easy to doubt ourselves. When we're a lifelong learner, it's easy to doubt ourselves. And when we work in a creative field, right, and we have to problem solve when there's no right answer, it's easy to doubt ourselves. And that's why they come up again and again through life. But the second take-home message there is it does soften, and that means learning how to deal with them. And learning how to deal with them starts by thinking about the consequences. Because at times, I catastrophize in a really jackal way, and it motivates me. And I work extra hard, and I get it right. And I get what I wanted. And I say, see, that doubling down on the story I was telling, all that catastrophizing, it helped. All those imposter fears made me go home and study like crazy, and I got a good grade, and here I am. So we get this message that they're helpful. The flip side of that, for those of you who think that you tend to tell some ostrich-like distorted stories, it can decrease our stress and buffer us from difficult feelings. So in the moment, it can feel great. When I get a really bad email, a review of a grant, especially a review of grant, thinking back to my time at UNC, because I had to tell everybody I didn't get it. So not only was there the immediate disappointment of not getting it, but there was this huge overwhelming feeling of, well, I got to tell everybody I suck, right? I got to tell everybody how badly this went. I notice that the ostrich, like, let me just ignore this, it's all going to be fine, don't worry about it, can really help in the short term. It can give enough space to prepare. Just like jackal distortions in the right perspective can help and push us to work or double check or go back and make sure we got it right. So it's not that they're bad totally. It's unchecked too much, unquestioned. That is when they can be a problem. Also, when they are inappropriately dumped on us by others. When somebody says, you didn't get this done, and now here is all the terrible consequences, and you are really never, using a word that we should avoid as much as possible, you will never get what you want, right? Those are distortions dumped on us. When they are unchecked, unquestioned, or inappropriately dumped on us, they can really add to our struggle, and they can lead to a lot of self-sabotaging behavior. And probably as I think about the development of this course, it is this one slide that to me matters the most. We tell ourselves unhelpful stories, they drive our behaviors, and then they become true because we chose all these unhelpful behaviors. And we self-sabotage by not asking questions we need to ask, not talking to people we need to talk to, not applying for appropriate schools, positions, fellowships, not volunteering for opportunities in our group, outside of our group. We essentially hide. We let those imposter fears, driven by all of these distorted stories, make us hide, right? And because of that, we don't get all the experiences we need. Sometimes these stories become so toxic, we withdraw from community. We use unhealthy behaviors to try to soothe and take care of ourselves. We drink too much, we eat unhealthy, we stay up binge watching TV, playing hours of video games. Sometimes we avoid work, sometimes we overwork, but both in unhelpful ways. And so the self-sabotaging behavior that comes out of these stories are really worth thinking about. What we want, just like we said, ABC, our beliefs can minimize the consequences, right? Can decrease the chance that the consequence will be long-standing. We want to avoid a negative cycle of distorted stories. They drive unhelpful behaviors. They drive more adversity. That drives more distorted stories. That, cycle becomes really negative. So step number one is to explore the stories. And we started with that just a little bit with both the poll on characterizing our cognitive distortions and also a little bit at the beginning in that prompt about what are the helpful stories and what are the more painful stories. Journaling is a great place to look at the stories that you tell yourself. To write what happened and then write the story that you told can be very illuminating. You can even keep that list of distortions. You can go to Google. There's a list of about 25 common distortions. These are some of the most common we see, but there are others. You could keep a jackal, giraffe, ostrich log for a few days. Just notice your jackal talk or notice your ostrich talk. Celebrate some giraffe talk. You can talk about cognitive distortions and imposter fears. Something that's true about everything is, while there are boundaries and we want to be careful about what we share, anything we're willing to talk about, the stigma goes down, right? So talking about imposter fears and distortions and reframing stories can be really helpful. One of the reasons why we have the discussion groups, so I encourage you to come and talk about them next week. And I will also stress that finding a counselor or therapist and spending time exploring distorted thinking can be one of the greatest gifts that you give yourself. If you are an NIH fellow and you want to talk about distorted thinking, the OITE well-being advisors are here to help you do that. If you're at another institution or university, find the resources on your campus, find resources outside. Some of us are really caught in stories, and there's good reason for that. Things that happened to us earlier really can drive those stories, and those stories are getting in the way. And so it can be a big gift to explore the stories. Exploring them is the first step. The next thing is disputing them. A, B, C, D. D is for disputing, okay? And that is that we question them, we soften them, sometimes not. Sometimes we're telling a totally ostrich story and we say, I actually have to talk about how I'm ignoring a problem. I've been ignoring this problem for some time now, and it's time to do something about it. So it's not always soften, which is why I put question there. And I like to help myself do this by literally thinking the triangle. I don't usually write this out, but I have 3 of them here, right? So here are some thoughts that's going through, and this is a pretty typical story that we hear. I spend a lot of time in my office talking individually with fellows, also with PIs who tell their own stories, right? They have their own distortions and their own imposter fears, right? So I can't believe I'm getting so little accomplished. I won't get my grant proposal in. I probably won't have enough to submit for a talk at whatever meeting, fill in the blank about what you do. I can tell my PI is not happy with me. I'm never going to get a job. I'm not going to succeed. I probably won't get renewed. Things are really a mess. Now, that kind of story is going to drive feelings like panic, stress, worry, overwhelm, maybe resignation. Oh, there's nothing I can do about it. And the interplay between those thoughts and feelings can drive very unhelpful behaviors. I avoid lab, I ignore emails, certainly avoid emails from my PI, try to come in when they're not around. Maybe I'm suddenly more argumentative than normal and I get into an argument with somebody over nothing helpful, right? It never needed to be an argument. And it just becomes a cycle because all of those behaviors are just going to lead to a lot more unhelpful thoughts. Or it's just the opposite. Yeah, I'm aware I haven't met any deadlines. I know I haven't been especially productive lately. My research group is a mess. My boss is unreasonable. It's just a really bad time. I'll get started tomorrow. I'm sure I'll be really productive this week. I can catch up if I start now. I can make up all the time. Yeah, I know I should have started weeks ago, but I'll start now. It's going to be a great spring. Doesn't matter if I miss those deadlines. That would be a real example sort of to an extreme. These examples are always to an extreme of an ostrich way of looking at a situation. Now, here's the thing. That can make me feel a lot better. Suddenly I have some feelings of unworry, calm, relax. Maybe deep down I don't, but that how I'm noticing myself is like, yeah, this is going to be okay. Now that leads to behaviors because I do need to explore what's going on, but I'm feeling okay about the whole thing. I'm telling a story of this is all going to work out. So I don't explore needed change. I continue with work habits that aren't being helpful. I ignore talking with my boss about the issues. I avoid looking at whether I am overscheduled and overworked. Maybe a grant and a talk and mentoring a student was not a good idea. Maybe I'm burned out and right now this is too much, but I'm ignoring all that because I'm just telling myself it's going to be fine. What we're looking for instead is a more realistic story or a reframing of the story. And that's a great language to think of. And if you want to read some of the primary papers to use, reframing, right? So rather than that toxic jackal, everything is a disaster, rather than that, it'll all be okay, toxic positivity, lately I have been somewhat disappointed in my performance. The grant, the abstract deadline, other things, I am feeling overwhelmed right now. A part of me is just really struggling. I am feeling right now an awful lot of imposter fears. I need to regroup. I need to talk with, fill in the blank. Who do I need to talk to? Maybe I start at home with someone who supports me. Maybe it's my boss. Maybe it's a colleague. I don't know. I have to think it through, right? I need to consider changing strategies. I do need to talk to my boss, but not until I'm ready. A much more realistic story. So the adversity of being behind is still there. And the consequence, still, we'll wait and see what happens. But the reframe gives you the best chance of minimizing the consequences. So maybe I still feel worried, stressed, embarrassed, and disappointed, all the feelings I felt in the jackal story. But at the same time, I feel a little bit hopeful and focused and motivated and a little brave. Brave enough to go tell somebody I am overwhelmed. Brave enough to reevaluate my work strategies. Brave enough to tell my friends I need slightly different boundaries as I get through this. So the idea is that we pay attention to the story we're telling. And we ask ourselves whether it's an accurate story or an inaccurate story, and how can we reframe it in a more helpful way. The first thing when you notice a whole lot of cognitive distortions is try to pause. The minute we pause, we give ourselves a chance of reframing. You could take a deep breath. You could stretch, just acknowledge them, right? I hear a catastrophe story going on in my head. I hear some bad all or nothing thinking, unhelpful all or nothing thinking. I hear imposter stories. You could start simply with jackal, giraffe, or ostrich. Sometimes that's pretty grounding. Sometimes in our family with my siblings, we'll just say to each other, giraffe, giraffe, giraffe. I don't know why we say it 3 times, but for some reason it's always 3 times. Even on Zoom now, we live in different parts of the world, so we don't get together very, very often. But sometimes as things get heated about family things, someone will just say giraffe, giraffe, giraffe. Sometimes that's enough. But there are a lot of other things. So you are all training in some way to use scientific approaches in your scientific mind. So channel your inner scientist. What's the evidence that I'm never going to get into medical school? What's the evidence that we can't sort this disagreement out? What is the evidence actually that I don't belong here? Yeah, I made a mistake. Everybody does. But what's the evidence that I don't belong here? Some phrases that help. How likely is it that this will happen? How likely is it that my fear is exactly as it should be? Maybe it's exaggerated. I like to say, is there another hypothesis for that? All right, especially around mind reading and fortune telling, where hurt feelings are involved. Okay, so she didn't answer my email. And maybe there's something wrong. Is there another hypothesis? Yeah, maybe she's in a meeting. Maybe she's traveling. Maybe something happened at home, right? So is there another hypothesis? Is there a more realistic way to think about it? People who really enjoy the growth mindset literature will say, can I find my growth mindset? That's one that people have noted as helpful. And we've talked a lot about these stories not quite being realistic. So just ask yourself, realistic or unrealistic? Now, those are good ways to slow yourself down. If you can catch yourself and then slow yourself down and ask some of these questions. Now, sometimes we have a lot of time to go off and reflect, but sometimes we have to keep moving in the moment. So some things to help in the moment are mantras and affirmations, phrases or images that make you feel calm and capable, right? I have a stone that I often carry in my pocket. I can't even remember where I got it. I've had it for so many years, but often I'll just put my hand in my pocket and feel it. And something about that is calming. There is a huge literature on affirmations and visualizations. Affirmations are things we tell ourselves to help us find our resilience in the moment. And we can tell a first person affirmation or a second person. I can do this, or Sharon can do this. And there's actually an interesting science that we can be harder on ourselves than friends can be on us. So for some of us, second person affirmations really help. In addition to affirmation, sometimes a visualization makes a big difference. We're telling a story about not being able to do this poster session. We're dreading it. Everybody's heading over to the conference. We can't hardly eat. We didn't sleep well. We're going to present our poster. And a visualization is when we actually close our eyes and literally see ourselves doing it. And there are two types of visualizations actually in the literature. And one is literally we are in the space. So we're at the poster, we're delivering, we're going over it. People are saying, great, thank you. Somebody reaches over and says, that was so great. Are you going to be looking for a new lab soon? Like, we just see it go really well. The other way is we watch. Like, we're a fly on the wall watching. And for some people, that is much better than a first person visualization. The literature says one works more than the other, but I actually find it's something we just have to play around with. And while affirmations don't help me as much as visualizations, I had to learn that by trial and error. In the moment, we want to have a set of things that calm us down. Sometimes we have a lot of time to go and get support and work it through and think it through. And we should take that time when we have it. But sometimes something happens at a meeting and we still have to sit there and keep going, right? And we don't want to lose the momentum or the opportunity that comes there. So we want to hear them and work on them when we're not stressed. That's what the groups are about. That's what the well-being advisors are about. We run a skills group on cognitive distortions once or twice a year because these are real and they get in people's ways. So we want to work on them when we're not stressed. But in the moment, we also want to be able to access this material and use it. So I like to say hats. Hear your negative self-talk. Appreciate you have a choice to listen or not. Talk back like a realistic giraffe. So no toxic positivity, it's all going to be fine, right? We can do that for a tiny little bit to buffer the hurt, but eventually we want to look at what is. Resilience is really about looking at what is, right? And minimizing the risk to us. And the S of hats is seeking help and accessing resources. Sometimes in the moment, we can't do that. We just have to talk back and keep going. But I love that because it sort of has this analogy of changing my hat. Now, let's be honest, all of these toxic stories can come from outside. And actually, quite frankly, I think ostrich stories can be quite unhelpful, right? So you go to someone and say, I really want to do well, and I'm not feeling like I'm making, oh, everything's fine, you're okay. And sometimes that's because people are rushed. Sometimes it's because people aren't good at giving feedback because they want to be liked, and giving feedback doesn't always lead to being liked in the moment. There's a lot of reasons why people can also dump ostrich stories on us. I have a lot to say about that in terms of setting boundaries and being assertive. I have a lot to say to leadership, including myself, about our responsibility to provide mentor and management training and to require good behavior in research groups. So I have a lot to say, not related to this lecture, that I won't say today, although I will talk about over the course of the series. But I will say this: I think HAT still holds. We should hear the jackal language or identify the ostrich for what it is. Just because somebody said something to us doesn't make it accurate. Just because we thought it about ourselves, it's not accurate. I hope, as we gain more confidence in this, can appreciate that we have a choice to listen or not, and to talk to the other person about what they said or not. Right? We have some agency here to decide, was that feedback helpful or not? Do I need to address it or not? Will I let this go right now or not? Talk back, even if only to yourself. And here I think the S really matters: seeking support and community. When we receive jackal stories from others, they are like delivered with a big mic drop at the end, and it can feel so permanent. I think many of us can learn to let go of our own jackal stories faster than we can let go of the jackal stories we are told. And so many of them are driven by stress, bias, old beliefs. I don't know, so many things drive those stories. So I think it's important to appreciate that HATS holds no matter what. It is harder to accomplish when they are dumped on you by others, right? Because often you rely on those individuals for continued success. So there's a lot of work in that regard. In general, what we've been talking about really is the art of reframing, okay? And that is how we tell a story about ourselves. It is the belief part. It's the disputing part, the D here, right? So at least 70% of all people feel like an imposter sometimes. It's a common part of the postbac experience. It's a common part of being a new postdoc in a lab. It's a common part of being a brand new mentor. I am not alone. If you like second person affirmations, you are not alone. All right. It's the idea of reframing the situation in a more helpful way. And I gave you some examples. Now, one really important thing, we often think the best thing to do is hide, but I just want to remind you that stories lead to stories. Okay. So you are telling yourself a story, and it leads to a bunch of unhelpful, unfortunate things like avoiding lab and ignoring important emails, arguing with colleagues, hiding from your PI. You're making more mistakes because you're totally distracted, overwhelmed, stressed, jackaled out, right? The thing is that somebody is watching those behaviors, and they're just telling a story about them. They have no idea what's going on internally. They're just seeing outward behaviors, right? And then they tell a story like, wow, Sharon hasn't been around a lot. She doesn't seem to be participating in journal club or lab meeting. She really must not care about science anymore. I wonder if she just has decided this isn't for her. Yeah, probably it's not for her. It sure seems like she thinks it's not for her. Stories lead to stories. Now, we teach this to mentors and say, if you're seeing behaviors, pause and try to figure out what's going on underneath them. Ask people, hey, are you okay? Hey, what's happening? Hey, I've noticed you seem disengaged lately, right? That's one take-home message. That's for the mentors. From your perspective as a mentee, and many of you are both, right? So it's good to learn it from both ends. The thing is to appreciate that when we hide and we don't share what's happening, or we share at the wrong time and not in a helpful way, we can really amplify the consequences. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind. So we talked about hats, and we're going to segue for a moment and talk about rabbits. I don't remember what I was just watching in Magic, but you know, they pulled those rabbits out of a hat. And for a while during the pandemic, I got obsessed with these. So you can tell me later that there are too many of them. But I want to talk a little bit about emotions and the interplay between distorted negative thoughts and uncomfortable feelings. So we tell distorted negative thoughts, and it drives a lot of uncomfortable feelings: frustration, panic, worry, embarrassment, anger, overwhelm, helplessness, sadness, resignation, shame. Just reading the list is a little bit sort of energy out. Those are uncomfortable emotions. Emotional regulation, which we introduced last time very briefly, is really at the heart of the matter here, because you have to have time to reframe the story. All these emotions are floating around you. And if you act on those emotions right away, you can really get caught. So we want to remember the model, right? That we have a series of thoughts playing together with a series of emotions, and they can be comfortable or uncomfortable, helpful or unhelpful. And our goal when it comes to emotional regulation is awareness, just like with the stories. We want to be aware of the types of stories we tell, accurate interpretation, just like we want to ask ourselves, jackal or giraffe, right? So am I decoding this frustration appropriately? And regulation. Reframing when it comes to stories, regulation is the language we'll use when it comes to emotions. This is especially relevant for difficult emotions, like I am feeling really uncomfortable now, a lot of discomfort, I'm going to hide. But really, the helpful thing would be to talk to somebody about it. So emotional regulation really comes to play around anxiety, discomfort, frustration, disappointment, embarrassment, anger. And I like to say that the emotion underlying imposter fears is disconnect. You may have other emotions that you tie to imposter fears, but I'm going to throw disconnect on the list. What happens is we feel like we don't belong, so we back out of the group. And that's why I like to use disconnect. The overall goal of emotional regulation is to make good decisions where we can use our ability to reframe together with our ability to regulate our emotions to get the best possible outcome. The event has already happened. The story is already happening. The consequences will come as they come. Can we have the best possible outcome? And so I just want to talk very briefly about interpreting emotions accurately. The thing about emotions is they just are, but they can be decoded wrong, just like the stories just are, but they can be told inaccurately. So it's sort of appreciating upfront that our first interpretation is often especially poorly thought out, okay? It's pausing to check if the first interpretation is accurate. So I feel hurt, I should lash out. I feel frustrated, I should do something about it right now. I feel slighted, I should speak up. It's sort of feeling, behavior. 1, 2, quickly. Whereas what we would like to do is put in a pause, maybe many more dots than that. I feel slighted right now. I'm going to pause before I say anything. Sometimes we can't. Safety is at an issue, but very, very often we can pause. Give you an example with imposter fears. I feel really disconnected right now. Imposter fears are loudly filling my head. I have a question. It really feels important, but I'm not gonna ask it because I'm probably wrong. I feel imposter fears. Let me pause. I'm going to deal with it by, maybe in the moment you can't ask, but maybe you can go up after class. Or maybe you can say, I'm going to deal with it by reminding myself this is a class and the teacher just said, are there any questions? I'm going to deal with it by remembering other people probably have questions. I feel frustration. Rather than taking my first action, I'm going to sit for 30 seconds, 50 seconds, 80, however long, and come up with a list of 3 possible actions. And then I'm going to pick the best. The idea behind this, just like we talked about reframing when it comes to thoughts, the idea behind this is tolerance. Okay, that's the ability to withstand or endure uncomfortable emotions while taking helpful actions. And tolerance is a rough word because we shouldn't tolerate completely abusive relationships. So we have to use the word tolerance in the right context. But in this context, it's accepting that uncomfortable emotions may go up in the short term because we're going to take helpful action. Tolerance lets us modulate responses in the moment while we avoid unhelpful behaviors and initiate helpful behaviors, finishing that triangle. I'll see you later. So 3 important tolerances: frustration tolerance, the ability to deal with delays and address obstacles calmly, the ability to put hassles and slights into perspective; discomfort tolerance, the ability to accept uncomfortable feelings while persisting in a task that's important. I am struggling with this, and I need to keep struggling because it's important to me. Fear tolerance, the ability to acknowledge fear and decide whether it's fully warranted, partially warranted, or not warranted at all. And that's why I love the language imposter fears. Are these imposter fears warranted right now? Am I in a place where I could ask that question and deal with the imposter fears by putting them aside? So some really important tolerances to keep in mind. And I said it's about hearing a message and asking, is there an alternate hypothesis? And so I gave you some for discomfort and embarrassment, right? I feel uncomfortable, I should stop. Could be instead reframed as, I feel uncomfortable. Yeah, this is hard, but this is important and I need to try again. I feel embarrassed. I need to hide. I wish this hadn't happened in this moment. It's a big ouch. It's not a shining moment for me right now, but I need to find support because I got to come back and address this later. So some really important ideas behind this. And I think reframing and learning about distortions is a whole lot easier than emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, and building tolerance, especially because often we can take tolerance too far, right? We can say, oh, I just have to suffer with this no matter what. So I just wanted to give you some tools about that. And that brings me to rabbits. So we've learned about cognitive distortions and our thoughts, and it goes along with recognizing our feelings. So rabbits, recognizing them, acknowledging them, we need to pause. All right. If we just go right with the first assessment of our feelings, we will often lead ourselves towards unhelpful behaviors. So we want to breathe deeply and acknowledge them or be with them. And then comes in the I, interpret them accurately, take actions or not, and seek support and guidance. So this is the equivalent of hats for distorted talk. It's rabbits when it comes to emotional regulation. I don't think we can reframe stories till we start thinking a little bit about emotions. And I want to end, it's a really hard way to wrap up, but I'm going to do it anyway because this is where it fits. I think that shame fills our educational and research spaces. Shame, as defined by Brene Brown, who is a shame researcher who also writes popular books about shame. Shame is defined as a really intensely painful experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. I think in many ways, imposter fears are all caught up in shame. right? Of maybe we don't really belong here. We've shown that we don't belong here. The thing is that shame, just like imposter fears are pretty universal, shame is universal. It's experienced by everyone, and it adds to the feelings of disconnection. Shame is often about who we are, not what we did, right? And we really tend to get caught in shame. Shame causes people to hide, and hiding means we don't get the help and support that we need. Sometimes people stay in untenable research environments because they take all the blame, and that blame leads to shame, right? And you get caught. Our culture drives shame about things that come hard to us. We look around and think it comes easy to everyone but us. Shame drives a lot of our hiding around help because we think we're supposed to do it ourselves, even around vacations and times away, right? We don't want to tell somebody we need to go away. It comes with choices around careers, right? Because the community has sent messages that there are better careers and worse careers, and actually even subdivisions of better and worse within a choice, right? Oh, that kind of university or that kind of university, or people would go here. I've been in so many panels around grad school choices where someone has said, you have to just go where the best science is. It doesn't matter where you want to live. And then when we realize, well, actually, I want to be near my family or far from my family, or I don't like that coast, or I don't like that cold. If we feel shame because we got this message of we have to sacrifice all the time. I miss some things here. There is a lot of shame in educational and research environments. And I think it makes the whole rest of this harder. And so when we think about resilience, I also want to think about one special and unique kind of resilience, which is shame resilience. And that's the ability to know who we really are. It's the ability to be kind to ourselves. It's tied in with the self-compassion piece that I mentioned briefly last time, and that will come up more and more. So those imposter fears, instead of saying in a jackal way, I got to stuff them down, say, I know where they come from, and I still don't really want to listen to them. So what can I do about it? It's about talking with people we trust. It's about taking good care of ourselves. It's about learning these positive coping strategies. If something doesn't work for you, don't do it. Do something that does, right? I said affirmations, not so helpful, but visualizations, wow, they can bring me back to center in a moment. Some of you, meditation will be really helpful, and others will say, oh my gosh, a minute in, it feels like 2 hours and I got to get up. We'll all have to figure out how to take care of ourselves. It's about community, and it's also about understanding the context. Science is a very slow to change culture. It is built on an apprentice model, which doesn't work and hasn't worked for a long time. We are changing. You are a part of changing just by showing up here. But I think we really have to work together on all of this. There are ways in our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. We talked a lot about ways in today around thoughts and feelings. Behaviors came up just in the things people mentioned at the beginning, from exercise to talking to people to attending the group to getting some sleep to cooking some healthy food. So I want you to end with a journaling prompt when you get a chance. What distortions drive the stories you tell yourself? Look at home and at school or at work. Sometimes they're different, right? Sometimes it's the same, but sometimes it's different. Think about yourself as a jackal, giraffe, or ostrich, and what would you like to do differently moving forward? I think that of all of them, we get the most comments about this lecture because I think cognitive distortions, there's a lot of ways in. There's a lot of ways to see them, and there are a lot of ways to think about them. But I think the more important message here, along with that, is just how much the emotional piece plays in as well. And scientists, we are told to stuff those emotions. And I think it makes this part especially complicated as you play around with the material. There are in-person groups in Building 2 on the 15th. Monday is a holiday. I hope that all of you, a federal holiday, I hope that all of you get outside. It looks like we are going to have some amazing fall weather for the next 3 weeks. Nature is healing for everybody. There will also be virtual discussion groups on Zoom the same Tuesday, and there is a virtual discussion group for trainees who identify as neurodiverse, and you can email our wellness box to participate. So with that, I will take questions, except I just messed up, Uli, and clicked out of that. So again, for those of you who came in person, thank you. I was walking over here and thinking, oh, maybe nobody will come and I'll stand in an empty room. And so it's very, very nice to see some faces and see some folks that I know. Folks I would love to talk to anytime if I don't know you. And I will see you in 2 weeks. I see these first two as foundational. 3, 4, and 5 are skill-based using this material. And so 3, we will talk about assertiveness and boundary setting. 4, we will talk about feedback. And 5, we will put it all together and talk about building healthy mentoring relationships. So if anybody has a question here in the audience, go ahead and yell it out. And if not, as I promised the last time, I will stay for a while and answer questions. Yeah. Yeah. So the question for those of you who couldn't hear is, what exactly, can you repeat again exactly what shame is? So shame is this feeling that we aren't enough, that we don't belong, that we are lacking, and therefore these things have happened to us. Okay, it's this deep feeling that we are insufficient and not deserving of belonging, success, support, caring. Not exactly the slide, the words up there, but said in my own way. You're welcome. I should say that we have a lot of well-being books in the library in Building 2, and probably have the Brene Brown books. And if not, if you want to read one and don't want to buy it, just let me know and I'll share a copy with you. Any other questions in the room? Yeah, I will. The first question's, how do you recommend we drive out catastrophizing thinking when actual catastrophe surrounds us? War, climate disasters, health crises, etc. Yeah, it's a little bit why I started with my comments about how heavy the world feels right now. You know, I'm not going to say anything especially helpful, but we can exist in a world that feels hopeless and we can have hope at the same time. We can look at the things that we can do to contribute to support. We can appreciate the small victories. We can take actions when we can, right? We can. So it's interesting, I think, about climate disasters. In the middle of the pandemic, one day I said, we should be vegetarian because, you know, that would help the climate. And so many people say to me, it's just 2 people, 1 little household, right? But some reason when I do that, it feels like my little contribution. And yeah, some days it feels like sand into the ocean and it gets lost. And sometimes I imagine millions of people making little contributions and things are going to get better. And so how we manage the chaos around us in our world right now is by finding connection, by trying to have compassion for ourselves and everyone else around us, doing what we can and acknowledging that there is no very good answer to that. So I don't have a magic bullet and none of us have a magic bullet. I think the word syndrome is more important than fear. because it allows various types of emotions, which I think are more accurate than just fear. I think that that's a nice perspective. Thank you for sharing it. And I think that we all should use the language that resonates for us. I think my response to that internally is fear comes with lots of other emotions, but at the heart of it, I think fear is driving this. So I like fear, but I'm going to think about that some more. And who knows, maybe in the next slides, I will make some changes. And if you have some specific changes, feel free to make them. I don't know, somebody provided a link to a YouTube video. So I don't have anything to say about that. I can do as much of this as I want, but how do you suggest navigating an environment where no one else values or believes in this stuff? There's only so much I can do. I need other people to meet me in the middle for this to work. Yes, and that is true. And all things being equal, we will change the culture of science so that everyone choosing a research group will start by asking questions about how conflict is handled and well-being is managed and how feedback is given. And we wouldn't choose solely based on science. In fact, we wouldn't put science first. And if I were to look back at this and somebody said, what is one thing that you think would make this successful? It would be that the tormentors and the absent mentors of science have empty labs where the silence is very loud, that they can't recruit people because they don't treat people well. So I agree that ultimately the community and culture and the individual research spaces have to meet us partway. And ultimately, I wish that we had lots of tools to deal with that. And we do have some, many more than when I was a graduate student, and still not enough. That said, I think all of us can do a good job taking care of ourselves by finding community around us. And that in and of itself is an act of culture change. That in and of itself adds to making science and work environments safer, healthier, and more well-being oriented. When I came to NIH, I don't think there was a single email about well-being. And now we have an entire wellness at NIH website. OITE has an entire center for trainee well-being. The American Society for Cell Biology invites OITE to come and teach a well-being curriculum. Faculty from all over the United States and the world watch our Raising Resilient Scientists series. So every time we band with one person who agrees with us and does something, it adds to culture change. But I agree, ultimately, if you have the option to find an environment that supports this, you are doing yourself a huge service in that, and you are doing all of science a great service as well. If you are in a situation where you're not receiving honest feedback despite repeatedly asking for it, how do you navigate that? I'll talk about that a lot in Unit 3 and Unit 4. Sometimes we have to try a different way and we get what we want, and sometimes we have to accept what is and try to find alternate sources of feedback, and we'll talk about that a lot more in some of the other units. What questions should I ask myself to understand if I belong or not in a place or a job? Is it just a feeling that can be changed, or are there objective measures? I added a little bit to that question. So I get this a lot. People say, I feel like an imposter and it tells me I'm really not cut out for this. And maybe that's true. And maybe it's not. And I think that's the thing, is not to act on that immediate story, but to get the right mentors to talk it through. Sometimes people say to me, I want to resign and this is just not for me. And they move to another group or a different field. They say, oh, maybe it's bench science that's not for me. Let me try computational. And I bump into them 2 years later. And I just hear this huge story of the positive change and the success from that change. Sometimes we say, I don't belong here, and it's accurate. We don't. And how we discern that is giving ourselves time, talking about it to different people, journaling about it, paying attention. Do I smile when I say I think I want to go? Or do I pause, reflect, look down at the floor? Like how is it in the whole experience of doing that? One time when I faced a really big decision, somebody had me sit in one chair and talk pro about the decision and get up and move to the other chair and talk about it negatively. And I realized I'm not ready to get up. I'm not getting up and going to that other chair. Finally, it was like, you have to. I did. I'm like, I'm going back. We have to use tools to discern what is a temporary story not to listen to and what is a repetitive story that we should be listening to. And I guess resilience is about figuring out where that is and how to do that. How does one assess whether the discomfort is warranted and should be tolerated or is an unwarranted imposition due to external factors? A bit of the same thing, but in that case, talking to others can make a really big difference and can be very, very helpful. Right. So is this a common experience, or am I telling this story in a group and everybody is saying, oh, that wouldn't happen in my group or my group or my group or my program? No, that wouldn't happen. I think that it comes from senior mentors. It comes from being willing to ask. And the problem is the discomfort makes us hide and we don't ask. I'd like to ask, when we are in free state while dealing with huge and complex problems without enough skills, resources, and support, do you have any tools, strategies in mind on how to deal with that circumstance so that we can move into positive progress and not get stuck? You know, it's interesting. We talk a lot about fight and flight, but we freeze a lot and we do one other thing, fawn. We tell people we're okay and happy and agree with them and it's so great and we're so happy to be here. So freeze means, you know, we're really literally stuck, and fawn means we just gush and it's not authentic or accurate or truthful. So first of all, that skill never comes first. We have to learn how to pause and work our way through things when we have time in more comfortable places before we're going to deal with I'm frozen and need to go on in this hard environment. So we have to decide what those spaces are. Now, I'll give an example around giving talks, right? It can be really hard in the moment to answer questions. So you want to sign up to give talks in safer places. No place is safe when you have to stand up and talk if you're stressed about it, but safer. Maybe it's a lab meeting. Maybe it's a group of students who get together to support each other. Maybe you're a postbac and it's NIH postbac, the postbac committee's postbac seminar. We do things in lower stress environments. We learn the skills there and we apply them increasingly to more stressful places. Also, I see more and more people taking a breath, asking for a moment, than I ever did before. I actually think people are listening in many of the well-being lectures that PIs go to, staff go to, trainees go to. I've seen a lot of people take a deep breath and ask for a moment, and sometimes that's all it takes. I think early in my career, that stone made a big difference. I don't carry it as much anymore. But it made a big difference. And I realized that that was what I needed sometimes. So we have to figure out what we need. And we practice in the lowest stress situation we can. And as we use those skills in higher stress situations, we debrief with supportive people. So after the fact, we talk about what went well and what didn't go quite as well, what we'd like to change. Can you talk a little bit about working on distortions, beliefs, shame, emotions when having to work with people who really take up a lot of space, super loud, overconfident? Yeah, you know, work is full of overconfident people. Work is full of people with privilege. There were some comments in the question. There was a comment about particular identities. There's a lot of very confident people in science, sometimes with good reason, sometimes not. There's also a lot of extroverts. We think about science as such an introverted field, but the honest truth is team science has really favors the extroverted individuals. Then you put on top of that language differences in such a multicultural international environment. And there are a lot of barriers, and some of them are internal and some of them are external. Sometimes talking to somebody who takes up a lot of space and doesn't give you time can help. Sometimes simply inserting yourself into that space can help. It depends exactly on the scenario. I think in science, we don't talk enough about choosing the right committee when you're a graduate student. For people who go to a graduate school that has a committee, it can be a great way to develop some skills of being assertive around power, using your committee to help you develop those skills. There can be allies in a group that help, right? Somebody says, we're going to let all the students ask their questions first. And maybe it doesn't quiet all the loud, overconfident people in the room, but maybe it softens it a little bit. The honest truth is that we have to find places to develop these skills where we feel supportive and where we can say, hey, you're taking up a lot of space right now, or you're filling the airways right now, or let's let someone else talk. It's another reason why I love our small group learning models, because there's no risk. It's not your PI, it's not your lab meeting, it's not your branch where you got to see people all the time. How to deal with the fear of not working, the shame of not being enough, even if we are clearly doing it and doing our best. I think that there are times when we are simply overwhelmed by all of this. There is so much perfectionism in this community and so much pressure to succeed that I think that we really do need some people who let us let go of all of that. Whether that is, when I used to joke, the first person I told when I didn't get a grant was Pearl. Pearl was our dog. Pearl was happy to see me no matter what. I came home, and whether I had a good day or a bad day, Pearl was wiggling, right? Her tail was going, certainly, jumping up just a little bit because she didn't have a whole lot of rules set in the house, right? We need some things that just let us let go. Sometimes we are doing the best we can and we face big disappointments, and we have to believe that there's another story there. We have to believe that there's another day that won't be as disappointing. And for the most part, we cannot do that alone. We might have some skills, but eventually we're going to need to turn to people to help us with that. What is your advice for convincing, in air quotes, yourself that it's not your imposter syndrome driving overwork that makes us successful? I've struggled with this for so long and never heard anyone talk about it. Thank you for touching on this. Overwork is an interesting thing because it gets rewarded, and we can really come to believe that it's helping us. And in fact, at times it does help us. That is what's so hard about overwork. Sometimes science requires overwork, and we do it and we have a great outcome. I think what we need is to then remember that too much overwork drives burnout, and burnout leads to health and mental health issues. And so we have to find balance. And so rather than wanting it to always be balanced in the moment, I like to look at balance over time, right? I had a really intense summer last summer. Our website launched, and an equally intense summer this summer for other reasons. And I started to feel really out of balance. And, it isn't that I made a wrong decision during that intense work. It's that I made a wrong decision when there was a break, not to really take advantage of the break. So it's a matter of looking both in the time frame, a short time frame, a longer time frame, an even longer time frame, and asking ourselves, am I finding time for all of the dimensions of me? And that is easier when we're in an environment that meets us halfway or encourages us back to acknowledging the comment earlier. I've spent an enormous number of hours going over these distortions in my mind, but encountering them in this format, explicitly described and ordered, was very helpful. Catastrophizing is my particular vice. You are welcome. I do think that categorizing them and writing down examples goes a long way. How can emotional reasoning be worked through? Would you recommend combating it with logic reasoning? I would actually recommend having a combination of thoughts and feelings. They go together. So, okay, I feel I made a big mistake. I feel stupid. I am stupid. Rather than just saying, okay, so logically, like, let me just logic this. The honest truth is, we all hate to make mistakes. And sometimes we make big mistakes that have big consequences of time or money, ego. So I like to say, yeah, okay, I made a mistake. I'm not stupid. I'm a smart person who has some blind spots, a smart person who was tired, distracted, who just made a mistake because, well, this isn't my smartest strong suit. I like both. I like to say, logic, everyone makes mistakes, but that doesn't help me deal with how lousy I feel in the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and sit with those feelings a little bit, and then I'm going to try to let go of the parts of the feeling that I need to let go of. I'm going to remember that feelings are like clouds and eventually will be gone anyway. How do you communicate emotional distress healthfully without overwhelming the listener? I'm neurodiverse and really notice people's reactions. So every time I share a story, instead of feeling relieved, I come with the intense fear of being judged, and I miss connecting even though I crave for it. Let me start by acknowledging the amount of self-awareness in that statement and the amount of skill and actually also courage it takes to look at the way relationships play out. One thing that I have found helpful for many people, and that I've talked about with a lot of people, and that I play around with myself, is sometimes starting by saying, I just need to vent. The other day, one of my staff sent me a message, and it was, like, I was like, so this isn't going to happen. I think you know that. I know that. And then the message ended with, just venting. Thank you very much. I find it, and that was fine. But I find when I'm nervous about people's reactions, it's better for me to say, I need to vent, or I'm feeling emotional right now. The other day, I said to someone, this might come delivered with a side of snark. And a friend who often will laugh at that said, I'm not in a snark place today. And it was really helpful because I paused for a moment and I'm like, I've done that to her a few times lately. And so I find a little bit of a few friends where you can really play around with skills like that might help a lot. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to run the group for individuals who identify as neurodiverse, because I do think a lot of this comes with an added layer of challenge. But I wonder if there's not a friend or two where you can start by saying, I need to vent. Judgment right now won't help, right? And that's another one. Can I have a judgment-free zone for 5 minutes? And if you can't find a friend like that right now, find a mentor. There are many of us paid to be there for things like that. So reach out. Industry has a name for it. Work culture, is that what we are looking for? Yeah, I would say we talk about the same thing, research group culture. We are looking for a culture that drives belonging, psychological safety, and well-being, and allows us to do good work and learn. And there are many cultures like that. I wanted to ask how to speak an unpopular opinion without coming off over negative or critical. I think sometimes the words we use aren't the issue. It's the energy behind the talk. It's the body language. It's the tone. It's whether we point, lean forward, all kinds of things. So I think being aware of that. I also think, just like I said about the emotions, I need a place to vent, or I need a judgment-free zone, or I gotta dump off some snark. Can you deal with it? A little bit, it helps with an unpopular opinion to start by saying, I'd like to share something that may not land so well. I'd like to share an unpopular opinion, but ask yourself if it needs to be shared. Sometimes I want to share my opinion and then I say, is this needed right now? And the answer actually is no, it's not, right? Sometimes we just want to vent in a public space. Sometimes we want to share for a reason. So hopefully that helped. Let me keep going. There's a lot of thank yous here. I'm a natural introvert. I feel quite comfortable sitting on my own, reading a book rather than looking for social contact. In fact, I frequently find it rather stressful, excluding encounters with particular people. Yet I am fully able to communicate with colleagues on work topics, but avoid private matters. What would you say to a person like me to improve my functioning within a research environment? First, I would say, like I pointed out in a lot of very good self-awareness there. Introverts, there is a lot of literature saying we favor extroverts and introverts bring a huge amount to the community and we should appreciate them. There's actually a book, I think, called The Power of Introversion that I think is really good. Kane, I think, is the author. I'm not positive, but if you just Google it, you'll find it. There are times when we do have to chat a little and be more extroverted, and acknowledging those times, knowing it, protecting yourself so you can do it. We all want to be who we are and we all want to flex outside of who we are. So the opposite for me is I always like to talk, but sometimes I should be quiet and listen. And it's good to remember that. And you should remember that it's really good to have healthy boundaries and not share a lot and take the quiet time you need. And sometimes it's helpful to go to lunch with everybody or chit chat a few minutes before lab meeting. That what we want is to be who we are, but be able to flex who we are to a degree that's comfortable. Where should I go for help if I don't have a support system? If you are at NIH, OITE is a great support system. Depending on the institute, the training office that you have, but OITE serves everyone. If you're at a university, look and see whether there is if you're a postdoc office, someone in the graduate office, a well-being advisor somewhere in your program, the program director. Ask yourself, who are my supporters? Right? Who at this institution has the responsibility for supporting me? And if you're unsure where to go and need some help with that, just reach out to me. What type of model do you think would be best for the academic research environment? I'm not sure exactly. That must be tied to something else that above. Okay, my question regarding some of what you said at the end. I have a lot of anxiety about finding the research environment that's best for me, but like you said, academia is based on the apprenticeship model, which doesn't work. You say climate is changing. I see a lot of pushback. Can you elaborate on how you have seen change happening and what sorts of change you've been seeing? I would love a more thorough discussion on this. Do you know where I could find resources or people at the NIH pushing for this type of change? And then what types of models? So I think that there is a lot of information about finding healthy research environments on the OITE webpage. While it is written for people looking for groups at NIH, the honest truth is you could skip the first paragraphs and the whole rest of it applies everywhere. It's about asking questions of the PI and other people in the group. It's about sharing a bit about your goals and needs. I think that that's a really, really good place to start. We will talk a lot about finding and managing mentoring relationships in Unit 5. I really feel that while that's what everyone wants, and I could probably start with that all of these other skills are actually foundational to it. Like no boss is ever going to make us totally happy or give us everything that we need. And we have to have some tolerance around that. We have to have some inner resource to be resilient. We have to have more healthy boundary setting. And so as frustrating as it is, I'm going to slowly add skills till we get to the end. A lot of PIs are very clear about their desire to be clearer about expectations, about community. They have welcome to my group letters. They talk a lot about relationship management, the importance of mentoring. There are a lot of subtle signs and not so subtle signs that it really matters to people. Yes, on interviews, people are on their best behavior, and PIs or all bosses, not just in research groups and offices too, promise the world and deliver none of it. But if we ask questions and we become a bit of an anthropologist landing in a new culture and try to figure it out, hopefully you find a way. Certainly at NIH, the OITE is spending a lot of time on this. We run a parallel course for PIs. We run some other mentoring courses. Many of the training directors in the institutes care deeply about this. I'm on a committee now through the Council of Graduate Students on defining what a healthy research group looks like. I think there's a lot of energy around this. And so looking around and trying to tap into some of that is really important. What about, are you even good enough to have imposter syndrome? That's a really interesting phrase there. I do think that is a really valid comment, that there are people who look around and say, well, this is all so outside my league, I should just, step back now. I assume that's a little bit of what you mean. I think so many of us haven't shared our really unusual ways of getting to science and getting to the successful career we have. I think people look at us and assume that we took very linear paths, that it was sort of preordained and obvious, that we didn't fail things, mess up, start again, have a whole lot of setback. And I don't know why that is. I think we tend to read the polished CV, not the accurate, truthful career journey. And then I think at times we think it's helpful to share in like huge detail every little struggle we had, but those struggles were 20 years ago and they don't resonate with people. So I don't think we have quite found a way to give all of you a sense. Yes, it's harder for some than others. Everyone has a backpack and it has a certain number of rocks in it. And some people are lucky to have really tiny stones, and some people have some massive big rocks that they have carried around with them through the entire educational space. So I'm not implying that it's equally hard for everyone, but everyone has struggled at times. And the way to think about imposter fears, if you say, I'm not even, good enough to even have them, is none of us were good enough at one time. And in all likelihood, as we move up in our career, I went from being a postdoc to running a lab, and running a lab to running OITE. At every transition, I went back down to, am I good enough? It is a part of the human condition to worry about being good enough. And if we're in a high knowledge environment and we have always had a degree of success, it is harder. And so I think we all have to accept that to some degree. Is there something you would recommend your mentor to attend, a class or a book that we can both read to decrease the imposter fears they promote in me? They're a large source of my anxiety. That's a really beautiful, actually all the questions have been beautiful, but that is really beautiful because it's so proactive. I'm willing to read and do the work. I want them to read and do some work. Off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you and say I can't think of a book. However, watching this tape or asking them to reach out for the parallel tape on resilience for PIs would be a really nice suggestion, and we would be happy. So the Raising a Resilient Scientist starts by talking about communication for promoting safety. The second is on resilience, and we cover a lot about imposter fears. The third is giving feedback. The fourth is inclusive and welcoming research environments. And the fifth is mental health and well-being of your research group. And maybe watching one or two of those. You could watch what I say to the PIs as well. Those are not on YouTube. I feel, I don't know, mixed about putting them out in the public space, but we would be happy to share it. You could also just share this tape. I think it would be really nice if your PI would engage a little bit. This is longer, so the Raising a Resilient Scientist, because I know PIs get impatient, is just an hour, and that might be helpful. If you're at NIH, we also offer coaching for PIs and would be happy to do that. If you're somewhere else, the tapes are and the lectures are open to everyone, although we don't have the budget to offer coaching across the country. There might be someone at that university who has done the Resilient Scientist training or something. So I have cleared the questions and cleared the room. I just want to thank everyone. There's a lot of really genuine and heartfelt questions, and I appreciate your time and energy, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.